jury selection began for Rick James. He's charged with and 2 women.
I made a mistake. I paid my debt. I'm just going to go out there and just do the best that I can.
Berry Gordy banned Rick James from Motown Records after discovering behavior so shocking it ended one of music's most profitable partnerships. The super freak hitmaker's descent into drugs and violence would culminate in crimes that horrified even the industry's most hardened executives.
Rick allegedly heated up a pipe and burned her over various...
What started as creative genius would spiral into and sadistic behavior that made collaboration impossible.
I want what I want, what I want, what I want, what I want, and I want it now.
This is the story of how Rick James became so dangerous that Berry Gordy had no choice but to permanently cut ties. So, let's get into it. James Ambrose Johnson Jr. was born into chaos in Buffalo, New York, destined to become the most troublesome of his mother, Mabel's 8 children. Even as a young boy, Rick displayed behavior that worried everyone around him. Rick's mother was astonished that he was so energetic as a kid. She took him to a doctor to see why he was running around so much.
The doctor didn't know what to tell her. He said he didn't think it was a mental illness.
His early criminal behavior was legendary in Buffalo. Rolling Stone reported that young James filled the family bathtub with stray dogs, dumped itching powder down his baby sister's back, and lodged a pearl in a brother's ear. By 13, he had developed a habit of stealing cars simply for the thrill of it, or sometimes because he wanted to see his women on the other side of town. The environment that shaped Rick was a perfect storm of poverty, abandonment, and moral confusion. His abusive father abandoned the family when James was only 7 years old. His mother, meanwhile, practiced religion, but broke the law regularly. According to James, Mabel was an ardent Catholic who also made most of her money facilitating illegal gambling for the Italian mob. When the Vietnam War began escalating, Rick James dreaded the idea of getting drafted to fight. Around age 15, he lied his way into the Naval Reserve, thinking this would protect him from combat duty. But military discipline proved incompatible with his rebellious nature. Before long, James dodged the reserves too. He told Buffalo News that he couldn't take the regimentation and conformity. Instead, he spent much of his time drumming for jazz groups and doing drugs, behavior that would define the rest of his life. In 1964, when he was placed on active duty, Rick made a decision that would haunt him for years. He fled to Toronto, Canada, becoming a military deserter. In Toronto, James met legendary musicians Joni Mitchell and Neil Young, forming a band called the Mina Birds with Young.
I really love you, darling, with a love that's so strong and so fine.
The Mina Birds actually got signed to Motown Records, where James met Stevie Wonder and performed for him. Impressed with his talent, Wonder wanted to know his name. James gave the alias Ricky James Matthews, and Wonder suggested that he shorten it to Rick James, the birth of a legend built on lies. But Rick's criminal past caught up with him. Still a fugitive from the military, James ended up serving a year in a military prison for desertion, which effectively ended the Mina Birds, but not the career of Rick James. This experience in military prison taught him that he could survive consequences, setting a dangerous precedent for future reckless behavior. When he was finally released, Rick James was free but forever changed. The young man who emerged from prison had learned to view rules as suggestions and authority as something to be manipulated rather than respected. After his release from military prison, Rick James found himself back at Motown, but this time working behind the scenes as a staff writer. He penned songs for established acts like The Miracles, Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers, and the Spinners.
In 1982, Rick James, who happens to be Melvin Franklin's nephew, wrote Standing on the Top for the Temptations reunion album.
However, James felt constantly underpaid and undervalued, leading him to make one of the most morally questionable decisions of his early career. That's where singer Jimmy Ruffin, the brother of former Temptations lead vocalist David Ruffin, came in. Jimmy proposed getting into the pimping business and using their respective girlfriends as employees. Someone with a normal moral compass would have rejected that suggestion outright, but James opted in and returned to Canada with Ruffin to embark on their shady endeavor.
His life off stage was purely he had endless women. He was
According to James's self-serving account in his autobiography, he didn't have the heart to be good at the job, or rather, he had too much of a heart. He claimed he didn't force women to work when they were tired, loaned them money, and beat up violent Johns. Even so, despite quitting when his music career advanced, James never exactly renounced the attitudes that led him into the flesh trade. Instead of viewing his time as a pimp as a moral failure, James used his stint in the flesh trade to build his legend later on, often bragging about his street credibility and dangerous past. This pattern of glorifying destructive behavior would become a consistent theme throughout his relationship with Motown. When Rick James finally returned to pursue music seriously, he signed with Motown's subsidiary Gordy Records in the late 1970s. It was here that he dropped his 1978 debut record, Come Get It, which went double platinum on the strength of singles like You and I. The label relationship was beneficial for both James and Motown, as the record label had seen sales drop precipitously as the 1970s drew to a close. Berry Gordy needed fresh talent to revitalize the label, and Rick James seemed like the perfect solution. His creative streak hit its peak in 1981 with the release of Street Songs, a concept record with hit singles Give It to Me Baby, Fire and Desire, Ghetto Life, and of course, Super Freak.
Girl is pretty wild now. Girl's a super freak. The kind of girl you read about.
The record sold 3 million units in America alone and was noted for its seamless blending of diverse genres like rock, new wave, pop, and parliament-style funk. James himself referred to his eclectic style as punk funk, a term that perfectly captured his rebellious energy and musical innovation. For a brief moment, it seemed like Rick James had found the perfect balance between his creative genius and commercial success. But even during this peak period, warning signs were emerging. James had subsequent hits, but never repeated the runaway success of Street Songs, and his increasingly erratic behavior was beginning to concern Motown executives. As Rick James's chart positions sank lower through the 1980s, he maintained his profile through epic intoxication tales involving rock's biggest stars. Whether with famous company or in solo hotel room sessions, James's constant companion was cocaine, along with a varied pharmacopoeia of other uppers and downers.
cocaine was considered harmless in the American record world when Rick was a
His reputation for drug use led to regular conflicts with law enforcement during tour stops, and the situations were becoming increasingly dangerous. In one particularly terrifying incident during the 1980s, Brother Leroy and Rick's security guard found him passed out and blue in his hotel room.
We grabbed him and we put him in the shower. We held him up until
His brother literally had to bring Rick back to life, but even this close call didn't slow down his drug consumption. Those close to him believed that it was Rick's huge ego that was to blame for his reckless drug use.
Rick thought that he was bigger than cocaine. He thought that he was...
By 1986, Rick's cocaine addiction had completely consumed his life. He would stay alone in rooms, covering the windows with aluminum foil and just sitting there smoking cocaine for weeks at a time. He wouldn't eat for weeks, and people would worry that he'd starve to death. The drug had changed him from a charismatic performer into a paranoid recluse. Staff would leave meals outside his room like feeding a dangerous animal, and a week later, he would finally emerge to eat cold bacon and eggs. As well as freebasing, Rick was also known to smoke crack cocaine. Freebase and crack are actually the same chemical form of cocaine and produce similar effects, but both can have a devastating effect on the heart and lead to severe mental health problems.
He would come downstairs into the studio and just ranting and raving.
His brother's attempts to intervene were met with desperate denials and promises that Rick couldn't keep. The drug had such a grip on him that he genuinely believed he couldn't help himself, even as he watched his career and relationships crumble around him. The combination of cocaine, isolation, and paranoia was creating a toxic mixture that would soon explode into violence. Rick's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic and unpredictable, making him a liability for everyone around him, including Motown Records. Berry Gordy was beginning to receive reports about Rick's behavior that went far beyond typical rock star excess, setting the stage for the final confrontation that would end their relationship forever. After 11 solo albums, multiple awards, and seemingly endless songwriting and production credits, Rick James's life and career hit the skids in the most horrifying way possible. Following the death of his mother in 1991, James wrote that, "There was nothing to keep me from descending into the lowest level of hell." What happened next would shock even the music industry, which had seen its share of scandals. In 1991, James and his then-girlfriend, Tanya Hijazi, whom he later married, were arrested for crimes so brutal they seemed impossible to believe.
Jury selection began for Rick James. He's charged with assaulting and torturing 2 women.
The details of the crimes were stomach-turning. James and Hijazi allegedly tied up a female guest at their home, burning her roughly 20 times with a crack pipe and a heated butcher knife, and forcing her to take drugs and perform acts against her will. The level of sadistic cruelty involved suggested a complete break from reality. Then, while out on bail in 1992, James and Hijazi reportedly imprisoned music executive Mary Sauger, who had known James for 6 years. Sauger said the couple slapped and choked her repeatedly over the course of 20 hours, treating her like a prisoner in her own industry.
Rick allegedly heated up a cocaine pipe and burned her over various parts.
James and Hijazi stood trial for both crimes in 1993. In court, the singer described spiraling into a deep depression and trying to numb the heartache with narcotics. But he also insisted, "I abuse drugs, not women," a statement that rang hollow given the evidence against him. The relationship between Rick and Tanya was heavily involved with drugs. They'd strip naked and take drugs endlessly, inviting other people over who would also strip and sit around for days, taking drugs in what could only be described as fueled that had devolved into sadistic torture sessions. Hijazi pleaded guilty to and served 15 months, but Rick's fate was more severe. James was narrowly acquitted in the first case, but convicted of imprisoning and assaulting Mary Sauger, as well as selling drugs. He received a 5-year sentence. The conviction sent shockwaves through Motown and the music industry. Berry Gordy, who had built his empire on family-friendly acts like the Supremes and the Temptations, could no longer ignore what Rick James had become. The represented more than just legal troubles. They were evidence of a complete moral collapse that made continuing any business relationship impossible. Rick James had crossed a line from which there could be no return, and Berry Gordy knew it was time to cut ties permanently. Rick James spent a little over 2 years behind bars, during which he wrote more than 300 songs, but his imprisonment marked the definitive end of his relationship with Motown Records. Berry Gordy had finally seen enough evidence of Rick's dangerous unpredictability to make the decision that had been building for years. He was released early in 1996, not because of good behavior, but because of misconduct on the part of an investigator in his case, who bribed a witness with drugs and money to testify against James. Even his release was tainted by the corruption and chaos that seemed to follow him everywhere. James was released from prison after paying Mary Sauger more than $1 million in damages from a lost civil suit. But the financial cost was nothing compared to the damage to his reputation and career prospects.
I made a mistake. I paid my debt. I'm just going to go out there and just do the best that I can.
Despite his public promises to turn his life around, the music industry had moved on without him. Motown Records, now under different ownership, had no interest in working with someone whose criminal record included torture convictions and whose addiction problems had proven impossible to manage. Rick released a somewhat successful comeback album, Urban Rhapsody, in 1997, but it was distributed through independent labels rather than major record companies. The major labels, including Motown, had effectively blacklisted him from the mainstream music industry. His brief career revival following his appearance on Chappelle's Show in early 2004 demonstrated that he still had talent and charisma, but it also highlighted how far he had fallen from his peak years.
I'm Rick James. Enjoy yourself.
But even this comeback was bittersweet. Reports from his final performance showed a man whose body had been ravaged by decades of drug abuse and whose voice was no longer the powerful instrument it once was. The tragic irony was that Rick James had actually achieved a kind of immortality through MC Hammer's sampling of Super Freak in You Can't Touch This. The royalties from that song continued to pay out to his estate, ensuring that his music would live on, even though his relationship with the industry had been permanently severed. Berry Gordy's decision to ban Rick James from Motown wasn't just about business. It was about protecting the legacy and reputation of a label that had been built on talent, professionalism, and family values. Rick James had become everything that Motown stood against, and there was no path back from the darkness he had chosen. On August 6, 2004, Rick James was found dead in his Burbank home by his housekeeper, Linda. He was just 56 years old, and his death marked the end of one of music's most talented and self-destructive careers.
Flash news out of Los Angeles now. Funk singer Rick James has died of apparent natural causes.
The official cause of death was acute cardiac dysfunction. His heart simply gave up after decades of abuse. The autopsy revealed 9 different drugs in his system at the time of his death, including cocaine, methamphetamine, hydrocodone, various anti-anxiety drugs, and prescription medications for allergies and heart issues.
I mean, I couldn't believe it. But then I remembered every other time I couldn't believe.
His heart weighed 780 grams, over 2 times the size of an average heart due to years of cocaine-induced cardiomyopathy. The organ was severely weakened and could have failed at any time, a ticking time bomb created by his own choices. In his final days, Rick had been calling old friends and trying to make peace with his past. 3 days before his death, he called his ex-wife Tanya, telling her he was proud of her and expressing what seemed like final sentiments.
They hadn't talked in a while. He told her he was proud of her and just good.
But these moments of clarity couldn't undo the damage of decades of self-destruction. The methamphetamine and cocaine in his system during his final days showed that he had never truly conquered his addictions, despite repeated promises to family and friends. The presence of methamphetamine was particularly telling, as Rick had not been known for using that specific drug during his peak years. Drug users in advanced stages of addiction often turn to whatever substances are available, mixing dangerous combinations that create unpredictable and lethal effects. The fact that he was using both cocaine and methamphetamine simultaneously in his final days revealed the depth of his desperation and the complete breakdown of any remaining self-control. His friend Avery had left him a heartfelt voicemail just hours before his death, explaining that she loved him but couldn't continue seeing him if he kept using drugs. It was a final attempt to reach the man she had known beneath the addiction. But Rick never heard that message. He died alone in his bedroom while she was trying to save him from a distance. The tragedy of Rick James wasn't just his death. It was the waste of extraordinary talent and the countless opportunities he had squandered. His relationship with Motown could have been one of music history's greatest partnerships, but his inability to control his demons made collaboration impossible. Berry Gordy's decision to ban Rick James from Motown ultimately proved prescient. the label protected itself from association with someone whose behavior had become increasingly dangerous and unpredictable. While Rick's music continues to influence artists today, his personal story serves as a cautionary tale about the cost of unchecked addiction and the importance of accountability in the music industry. Rick James died alone, his heart finally giving out after years of punishment. But his music and the lessons from his destructive choices continue to resonate today. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.